The execution chamber gleamed under harsh white lights. Millions of beings across the galaxy watched their screens as guards dragged a small figure toward the center platform. She looked so fragile compared to the towering Zarathi soldiers who held her arms. Their crystalline bodies reflected the light in sharp angles, making them appear even more intimidating. Sarah Chun was only 19 years old. Her dark hair hung loose around her face, and her brown eyes showed no fear. The Galactic Empire had captured her 3 days ago on a routine patrol near the human colony of New Eden. They said she was carrying illegal technology. They said she was a threat to galactic peace. But everyone watching knew the real reason. The Empire wanted to make an example. The Zarathi Emperor himself appeared on every screen. His form shifted between solid and liquid crystal, a display of power that had intimidated species across the galaxy for centuries. Citizens of the Empire, his voice boomed through translators in 1,000 languages. Today we demonstrate what happens to those who defy our laws. This human carried forbidden quantum communicators. Such technology threatens the stability we have maintained for 10,000 years. Sarah lifted her chin. When they asked for her final words, she spoke clearly. My name is Sarah Chun. I am a teacher from New Eden. I was bringing educational supplies to children in the outer colonies. You can kill me, but you cannot kill what I represent. The execution officer, a massive Korvax with skin like polished obsidian, stepped forward. In his hand was the Empire's favored tool, a molecular disintegrator. One touch would scatter her atoms across space. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. Sarah's lips moved silently. Those who could read human expressions later swore she was counting along, but not with fear. She was counting something else entirely. 7, 6, 5. The Emperor's crystalline form pulsed with satisfaction. Humans were newcomers to the galactic scene, barely spacefaring for 2 centuries. They needed to learn their place. This execution would teach them humility. 4, 3, 2. Sarah smiled. It was such a small expression, barely visible on the screens, but it sent an inexplicable chill through viewers across the Empire. 1. The disintegrator touched her shoulder. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, Sarah Chun dissolved into scattered light, her atoms spreading into nothingness. The execution was complete. The Empire had made its point. The Emperor's form solidified with pleasure. Let this be a lesson, he announced. The Empire's justice is absolute. No species, no matter how ambitious, can challenge our authority. But in homes, ships, and colonies across the galaxy, beings noticed something odd. Their chronometers all showed the same time. 14 hours, 33 minutes, and 27 seconds Galactic Standard Time. And somewhere, deep in space, 47 points of light began moving toward the Empire's core worlds. On the mining world of Kelver 3, a Threnodai worker paused in his labors. His compound eyes detected something unusual in the electromagnetic spectrum, a pattern that shouldn't exist. It repeated every few seconds, growing stronger. He didn't know what it meant, but his instincts, honed by millions of years of evolution, screamed danger. In the Imperial Palace on Zarath Prime, Security Chief Vax noticed the first anomaly exactly 3 minutes after the execution. A quantum signature appeared on his screens. Impossible, since all quantum communicators were strictly controlled by the Empire. Then, another signature appeared. Then, 10 more. Then, 100. Sir, he called to his superior, trying to keep his voice steady. We have a problem. The superior officer, a Zarathi whose crystalline form had taken on a deep blue hue of authority, glided over. What kind of problem? Unknown quantum signatures. They're multiplying exponentially. Location. Vax checked his instruments again, hoping he was wrong. He wasn't. Everywhere, sir. They're appearing everywhere. In her final moments, Sarah Chun had done something the Empire couldn't understand. She had smiled because she knew something they didn't. Humans might be newcomers to space, but they had learned lessons from their own bloody history. They knew about resistance. They knew about sacrifice. And they knew about timing. The quantum communicator in her possession hadn't been a legal technology for spying or warfare. It had been something far simpler and far more dangerous, a trigger. A signal that would reach every human in the galaxy simultaneously, quantum entanglement ensuring instant transmission regardless of distance. On the agricultural world of Haven, human farmers stopped their work. They had been preparing for this day, hoping it would never come. In the asteroid belts of the Sigma system, human miners powered down their equipment and powered up something else. On space stations, in trading posts, in the slums of great alien cities where humans scraped out livings as second-class citizens, the message arrived. The Empire had made a fatal error. They had assumed human technology was primitive because humans chose to live simply. They had assumed human nature was weak because humans chose diplomacy over conflict. They had assumed humans could be intimidated because humans had never fought back. 44 minutes had passed since the execution. In the Imperial Palace, alarms began to sound. Not just one or two, but hundreds, then thousands. Every defensive system the Empire had built over 10 millennia was screaming warnings. What's happening? The Emperor's form flickered between states, a sign of agitation. Unknown ships, Your Magnificence, Vax reported, his voice cracking. They're appearing throughout Empire space. How many? Vax looked at his screens, unable to believe what he was seeing. All of them, Your Magnificence. All the human ships. Every single one registered in our databases. They're all moving. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what the sensors couldn't detect. Hidden in dark space, in the voids between stars where the Empire never bothered to look, humanity's real fleet waited. Ships that had never been registered, never been counted, never been imagined by the Empire strategists. The humans had learned from their history indeed. They knew that empires, no matter how powerful, all shared one weakness: hubris. The belief that their power was absolute, their control complete, their understanding perfect. Sarah Chan had been a teacher, just as she said. But she hadn't just taught children. She had been part of a network of humans throughout the galaxy who taught their people to remember. To remember what happened when tyrants pushed too far. To remember that freedom was worth any price. To remember that sometimes to save everyone, someone had to go first. Her execution hadn't been a surprise. The humans had known it would happen eventually. The Empire always needed examples, and humans were convenient targets, numerous enough to be noticed, weak enough to be bullied. Or so the Empire thought. 45 minutes after the execution, the first human ships appeared in orbit around Zerath Prime itself. They didn't attack. They didn't need to. Their very presence was message enough. The Empire's vaunted defenses, their sensors, their entire security apparatus had failed to detect an invasion fleet until it was already in position. In the throne room, the Emperor's form began to fracture, shifting rapidly between states as his emotional control slipped. How? He demanded. How did they get past our defenses? The answer was simple, though the Empire wouldn't understand it for the few minutes they had left. Humans had spent 2 centuries being overlooked, underestimated, and oppressed. They had used that time wisely. While the Empire focused on grand displays of power, humans had focused on survival. While the Empire built monuments to their glory, humans had built networks of trust. While the Empire cataloged human weaknesses, humans had studied the Empire's arrogance. 46 minutes after Sarah Chun died, every human in the galaxy received a second signal. This one was even simpler than the first. A single word that needed no translation. Now. What followed wasn't a battle. Battles require 2 sides capable of fighting. What followed was a demonstration that the Galactic Empire, for all its 10,000 years of dominance, had forgotten the most basic truth of power. It only exists as long as those under it allow it to exist. In the final minute before the Empire fell, Security Chief Vax understood. The patterns he was seeing weren't random. The human ships weren't just appearing. They were appearing in precisely calculated positions. Every major trade route, every communication relay, every power generation facility. Humans were everywhere the Empire needed them not to be. But even that wasn't the killing blow. The killing blow was something so simple the Empire had never considered a threat. Humans talk to each other, not through official channels or approved communication systems, but through quantum entanglement devices they had built in secret, improving on stolen Imperial technology until it surpassed the original. When Sarah Chun died, every human in the galaxy knew instantly. When she smiled in her final moment, every human understood what was about to happen. And when the 47 minutes she had counted down expired, every human acted as one. They didn't fire a shot. They didn't need to. They simply stopped. Stopped working. Stopped trading. Stopped maintaining the systems the Empire had grown dependent on. Stopped pretending they were content with oppression. The Galactic Empire, built on the labor of 100 species but administered by the few, discovered that their greatest weakness was their smallest assumption, that humans were too scattered, too weak, too disorganized to ever pose a threat. As the 47th minute ticked over, the lights in the Imperial Palace began to flicker. Somewhere in the bowels of the great structure, human maintenance workers had walked away from their posts. Somewhere in the power generation facilities, human technicians had powered down critical systems. Somewhere in the communication centers, human operators had redirected every signal. The last image broadcast from the Imperial Palace showed the Emperor's crystalline form fracturing into 1,000 pieces, not from any weapon, but from the sheer shock of realization. The Empire hadn't fallen to invasion or warfare. It had fallen to the simple, coordinated action of people who had decided they had nothing left to lose. Sarah Chun had known she would die. She had volunteered for it, understanding that revolutions needed symbols and martyrs. But she had also known that her death would be the catalyst humanity needed, not to unite in grief, but to unite in purpose. As the Empire's power grid failed and darkness spread across Zerath Prime, her final message played on every screen that still functioned. She had recorded it days before her capture, knowing the Empire would never think to look for it. My name is Sarah Chun. When you see this, I am dead. But ideas cannot be killed. Freedom cannot be killed. And humanity cannot be killed. We are not conquerors. We are not warriors. We are teachers, builders, dreamers. But when you took our peace, you taught U.S. war. When you took our hope, you taught us patience. When you took our lives, you taught us that some things are worth dying for. The Empire ends now, not because we are strong, but because you were weak enough to think we were nothing. The Galactic Empire, which had stood for 10,000 years, fell in 47 minutes. Not to weapons or warfare, but to the synchronized action of species they had dismissed as insignificant. The humans had done something the Empire's vast intelligence networks had never predicted. They had planned not for war, but for the moment after victory. Commander Marcus Webb stood on the bridge of the HSS Liberation, watching the Empire's military response unfold exactly as predicted. Across a dozen holographic displays, Zerathi warships scrambled from their berths, their crystalline hulls catching starlight as they moved to intercept the human vessels. He felt no satisfaction, only the weight of what was about to happen. "They're hailing us," his communication officer reported. Lieutenant Torres, barely 25, had volunteered for this mission knowing she might not survive it. Like every human in the fleet, she understood the stakes. "Put them through," Marcus ordered. The image that materialized was exactly what they expected. Admiral Kryn, the Empire's most decorated military commander. His form was a deep purple crystal, denoting his rank and battle honors accumulated over 3 centuries of service. "Unknown vessels, you have violated Imperial space. Surrender immediately or be destroyed." Marcus stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back. He had rehearsed this moment, but now that it was here, he let instinct guide him. "Admiral Kryn, this is Commander Marcus Webb of the Human Solidarity Fleet. We're not here to fight. We're here to witness." "Witness?" The Admiral's form flickered with what might have been confusion or anger. "You will witness the destruction of your pathetic species. All ships, prepare to fire." "Admiral," Marcus said calmly, "before you give that order, you might want to check your fuel reserves." There was a pause. Across the Empire's fleet, warning lights began to flash. The antimatter fuel that powered their weapons and shields was running dangerously low, not because of any attack, but because the human workers who refined and transported that fuel had walked away from their posts exactly 15 minutes ago. "What have you done?" Crin's voice carried the first note of uncertainty. "We've done nothing," Marcus replied. "That's precisely the point. For 2 centuries, humans have done everything. We've mined your fuel, maintained your ships, grown your food, built your cities. We've been the invisible foundation your empire stands on. And now we've stopped." On the planet below, the situation was deteriorating faster than Imperial authorities could respond. The massive food distribution centers that fed Zerath Prime's billion inhabitants had ground to a halt. Human workers, who comprised nearly 60% of the workforce, had simply vanished. Not fled, vanished. They had used the same quantum tunneling technology that had brought the fleet here, stepping through portals to safe zones prepared months in advance. In the Imperial Senate, panic was setting in. Senator Vyth Axe, whose emerald form had governed the agricultural sectors for 50 years, was screaming at his aides. "Where are they? Where did they go?" His aide, a young Korvax who had never dealt with a real crisis, stammered, "They're everywhere and nowhere, Senator. The quantum signatures suggest they've dispersed to over 10,000 locations." "Then bring them back." "We can't, Senator. We don't have the technology to track quantum tunneling. We always relied on human technicians to maintain our quantum detection systems." The bitter irony wasn't lost on those few Imperial citizens capable of seeing it. The Empire had grown so dependent on human labor that they had given humans access to their most sensitive systems, never imagining that slaves might use their masters' tools against them. In the lower districts of the capital city, where humans had lived in cramped quarters for generations, Imperial forces found only empty rooms. But they weren't completely empty. In each dwelling, the humans had left a single item, a small holographic projector. When activated, each one showed the same image, Sarah Chun, smiling in her final moment. Back in space, Admiral Crin was beginning to understand the magnitude of the disaster. His tactical displays showed human ships appearing throughout Empire space, but they weren't attacking. They were simply everywhere, surrounding trade routes, hovering near communication relays, present at every critical junction of Imperial infrastructure. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, voice tight with fear, "we've lost contact with the outer colonies." "All of them?" "Yes, sir. The quantum communication network is failing. The humans who maintained it are gone." Crin finished. His crystalline form was developing stress fractures, something that happened to Zerathi only under extreme psychological pressure. Marcus Webb watched the Admiral process this information. He felt no joy in the aliens' distress. This wasn't about revenge or hatred. This was about survival and freedom. But that didn't make it easier to watch an empire die. "You planned this," Crin said finally. "How long?" "Since the day you made first contact with us," Marcus admitted. "We knew what we were the moment your empire saw us. A young species with useful skills and no military to speak of. We knew you would subjugate us. So we prepared. For war. No, Admiral, for revolution. War is what happens when two powers clash. Revolution is what happens when power realizes it was an illusion all along." In the Imperial Palace, the Emperor was experiencing something no ruler of the Galactic Empire had ever faced: complete helplessness. His throne room, once filled with sycophants and administrators, was nearly empty. Most had fled when the lights began to fail. Only his personal guard remained, and even they looked uncertain. "Your Magnificence," Security Chief Vax approached carefully. "We've managed to restore partial power using emergency reserves, but what?" The Emperor's voice was barely recognizable, his form flickering unstably. "The emergency reserves were maintained by human technicians. We have perhaps 6 hours of power remaining. Then fix it. Call the Threnodai engineers, the Altair scientists, anyone. We have, Your Magnificence." But they all say the same thing, they don't know how. The humans modified our systems over the years, improved them, integrated new technologies. The systems are so complex now that only the humans fully understand them. The Emperor's form shattered and reformed, a sign of rage that would have terrified his court on any normal day. But this wasn't a normal day. This was the day the Empire discovered that power without understanding was meaningless. Across the galaxy, the pattern repeated. On industrial worlds, factories fell silent. On agricultural planets, harvesting machines stopped in the fields. On trade stations, commerce ground to a halt. Not because anything was broken, but because the beings who knew how to run these systems were gone. The genius of the human plan was its simplicity. They hadn't tried to match the Empire's military might. That would have been impossible. Instead, they had made themselves indispensable, then removed themselves from the equation. They had turned the Empire's greatest strength, its vast, interconnected infrastructure, into its fatal weakness. In the Senate chambers, emergency sessions were being called, but fewer than half the senators could attend. Transportation networks were failing without human pilots and mechanics. Communication systems were dropping offline without human technicians to maintain the quantum relays. Even the simple act of opening doors was becoming difficult as building systems failed without human programmers to debug the inevitable errors. Senator Vyth Axe stood before the assembled remains of the government, his form a sickly green color of distress. How do we not see this coming? The answer was painful in its obviousness. They hadn't seen it because they hadn't looked. To the Empire, humans were tools, not people. You don't worry about your tools plotting against you. You don't imagine your machines might have dreams of freedom. But humans weren't machines. They were teachers and engineers, artists and scientists, parents and children. They had spent 2 centuries learning every aspect of Imperial technology, not just to serve, but to understand. And in understanding, they had found the Empire's weakness. It had grown beyond the ability of any single species to comprehend, requiring constant cooperation to function. Back on the Liberation, Marcus Webb received a priority message. It was from Maria Santos, the coordinator of the agricultural sector withdrawal. Her face was drawn with exhaustion, but filled with determination. Marcus, Phase 2 is complete. All human agricultural workers have been evacuated. Food production across the Empire has ceased. Casualties? Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. 17 confirmed dead, 43 injured. The Empire's security forces tried to stop some of the evacuations. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. 17 more names to add to the memorial. 17 more humans who had paid the ultimate price for freedom. But compared to the millions who had died under Imperial rule over the centuries, it was a miracle. What about the children? He asked. Maria's expression softened slightly. All evacuated in the first wave. 300,000 human children are now safe in the sanctuary zones. They'll never know slavery. This was what the Empire had never understood. Humans didn't fight for glory or conquest. They fought for their children, for the future, for the simple right to exist without chains. Admiral Kryne's fleet hung motionless in space, weapons powered down to conserve what little fuel remained. He had commanded hundreds of battles, destroyed dozens of species who had dared resist the Empire. But he had never faced an enemy who refused to fight. Commander Webb, he transmitted, what are your terms? We have no terms, Admiral, Marcus replied. We're not conquerors. We're not here to rule or destroy. We're here to leave. Leave. Every human in the galaxy is being evacuated to territories beyond Imperial space. We've prepared colonies on worlds you've never charted, using technology you never knew we had. We're not taking your empire, Admiral. We're just taking ourselves out of it. And you expect us to just let you go? You have no choice. Without us, your empire has days, maybe weeks before complete collapse. You can spend that time trying to stop us, or you can spend it trying to save what you can. The brutal mathematics of the situation were inescapable. The Empire's population was over 1 trillion beings across thousands of worlds. Humans numbered barely 10 billion, but they were the 10 billion who knew how to keep the lights on, the food growing, the ships flying. They were the nervous system of a body too large to control itself. On Zarath Prime, citizens were beginning to understand what was happening. The privileged classes, who had never concerned themselves with how their food arrived or their power flowed, were discovering that their wealth meant nothing when the systems that supported it failed. In the markets, food prices soared as supplies dwindled. The automated distribution systems, so efficient when properly maintained, became death traps of starvation when their human operators disappeared. The Empire had built a paradise for the few on the backs of the many, never imagining what would happen when those backs were no longer there to carry the load. Your Magnificence, Security Chief Vax reported to the increasingly unstable Emperor, we're receiving reports of riots in 17 sectors. The citizens are demanding food. Then, give them food, the Emperor roared, his form now more energy than solid matter. We can't, Your Magnificence. The food distribution AI is offline. The humans who programmed it implemented something they called a dead man switch. Without their daily input, it shut down permanently. Then restarted. We've tried. The code it's beyond our understanding. The humans evolved it over decades, adding layer upon layer of improvements. It would take our best programmers years just to understand it, let alone fix it. This was the second genius of the human plan. They hadn't just made themselves necessary. They had made their knowledge irreplaceable. Every system they touched, they improved. Every process they managed, they optimized. And every improvement made the Empire more dependent on human expertise. In his throne room, the Emperor faced a choice no ruler of the Galactic Empire had ever confronted. He could order his remaining forces to attack the human fleet, potentially destroying them, but guaranteeing the Empire's complete collapse. Or he could let them go, accepting the death of his empire, but perhaps allowing some remnant to survive. Vax, he said quietly, his form stabilizing into something resembling resignation. Order all Imperial forces to stand down. Your Magnificence. Let them go. Let them all go. Across the galaxy, the evacuation continued. Human ships, using quantum tunneling technology that the Empire's scientists couldn't even theoretically understand, appeared at human population centers. Families who had been separated for years were reunited. Children born into slavery walked onto ships as free beings. But not all humans left. In hospitals across the Empire, human doctors faced an impossible choice. Their oath to do no harm conflicted with their people's need for freedom. Many chose to stay until their patients were stable, knowing it might mean being left behind. On the mining world of Kelver 3, Dr. Elizabeth Chong worked frantically to stabilize her Threnodai patients. The atmospheric plague that had struck the colony would kill thousands without treatment. She had the cure, synthesized from human medical knowledge, but administering it to all the infected would take days. Doctor, her assistant, James Park, urged, the last transport leaves in 6 hours. We need to go. Not yet, she said, injecting another patient. Not until they're all treated. The Empire enslaved us. The Empire did, she agreed. But these beings didn't. They're just sick and scared like anyone would be. This was the third aspect of humanity that the Empire had never understood. Their capacity for mercy. Even in revolution, even in the moment of triumph, humans could see the suffering of others and choose compassion over revenge. Admiral Kryn watched his tactical displays as human ships continued their evacuation. His weapons officers awaited orders that would never come. The Empire was dying, and he was presiding over its funeral. Sir, his communications officer interrupted his thoughts. We're receiving a transmission from the human commander. It's not military. Put it through. Marcus Webb appeared on the screen, but he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a small girl, perhaps 7 years old, clutching a worn stuffed animal. Admiral, Marcus said, "This is my daughter, Lily. She was born on Zarath Prime, in the human quarter. She's never known a sky that wasn't controlled by your empire. Today, she'll see her first free sunset. Why are you showing me this?" Kryn asked, though he thought he knew. "Because I want you to understand what this was all about. Not conquest or revenge, but her The right for her to grow up as a person, not property. The right for her to dream of being whatever she wants, not whatever the Empire needs. Lily looked at the screen with the fearless curiosity of childhood. Are you the crystal person my teacher talked about? Kryn found himself responding despite everything. I suppose I am. My teacher said you're not bad, just different. She said the Empire forgot that different doesn't mean better or worse. Out of the mouths of children, Kryn thought, came the wisdom that empires ignored. The humans hadn't won because they were stronger or smarter. They had won because they remembered what the Empire had forgotten, that power meant nothing without purpose, that strength meant nothing without compassion, that an empire built on oppression would always fall to those who simply refused to be oppressed. Your teachers sound wise, Kryn said finally. Lily replied. Her name was Sarah Chun. The bridge fell silent. Even across species, the weight of that revelation was felt. This child's teacher, who had taught her about understanding and difference, had been the same woman whose execution had triggered the Empire's fall. Marcus placed a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder. Admiral, in the human databases we're leaving behind, you'll find complete documentation of every system we maintained, every improvement we made, every process we managed. We're not leaving you helpless out of cruelty. We're leaving you with a chance to build something better. Why? Kryn asked. Why help us at all? Because slavery corrupts both slave and master, Marcus replied. We're freeing ourselves, but we're also freeing you from what you become. The Empire fell because it forgot that true strength comes from cooperation, not domination. Maybe what comes next will remember that lesson. The transmission ended. Across the Empire's dying domains, the last human ships were departing. They took with them not just 10 billion people, but the accumulated knowledge and experience that had kept the Empire functioning. They left behind infrastructure that would work for days or weeks, and after that, only the Empire's ability to learn would determine its fate. In the Senate, emergency motions were being passed to free all enslaved species, not out of nobility, but out of desperate necessity. If the Empire was to survive in any form, it needed every being working together voluntarily. The age of domination was ending because it had to end. Senator V. White E.H. Axe, architect of agricultural policies that had fed trillions while enslaving billions, stood before his colleagues with something alien to his species: humility. We built our empire on a foundation of sand, convincing ourselves it was stone. The humans have shown us the truth. We must change or die. Change or die. The choice that faced every empire eventually, but usually only after centuries of decline. The humans had compressed that timeline to 47 minutes, the time between Sarah Chen's death and the Empire's fall. On Earth's first colony ship, the Remembrance, the evacuation coordinator checked her list one final time. 10 billion, 43 million, 700,000, and 16 humans accounted for. All but a few thousand who had chosen to stay behind to complete humanitarian work. She thought of Sarah Chun, who had volunteered to die so that these billions could live free. She thought of the 17 who had died during the evacuation. She thought of the countless millions who had lived and died under imperial rule, never seeing this day. Ma'am, her assistant reported, we're receiving a transmission from the Imperial Senate. Put it through. The image that appeared was unprecedented, the entire remaining Senate standing together. Senator V. White E.H. Axe spoke for them all. To the human people, we, the representatives of the Galactic Empire, formally acknowledge your independence and sovereignty. We ask for your forgiveness for centuries of injustice. And we hope that someday, when we have learned to be better than we were, we might meet again as equals. The coordinator felt tears on her cheeks. After everything, after all the pain and planning and sacrifice, the Empire was doing something it had never done in 10,000 years, admitting it was wrong. Tell them, she said quietly. Tell them we'll be watching the stars. When they're ready, they'll know where to find us. As the last human ships vanished into quantum space, heading for freedoms beyond imperial reach, they left behind more than empty positions and silent machines. They left behind a question that would echo through the halls of power for generations. What is an empire without the people who make it work? The answer was scattered across a million worlds as systems failed and certainties crumbled. An empire without its people was nothing but ambition without ability, dreams without hands to build them, power without purpose. 47 minutes. That's how long it took for humanity to teach the galaxy's greatest empire its final lesson. Not through war or conquest, but through the simple act of refusing to participate in their own oppression. Sarah Chun had died, knowing that her death would light a fire that would burn away the chains of 10 billion souls. In the empty throne room of Zayrath Prime, the Emperor sat alone in growing darkness. His crystalline form had stabilized into something new, not the sharp angles of authority, but the smooth curves of contemplation. For the first time in his centuries of life, he understood the truth that had destroyed his empire. Power wasn't taken, it was given, and humanity had simply decided to stop giving. The Galactic Empire, which had stood for 10,000 years, had fallen in 47 minutes. But from its ashes, something new would have to grow. Something built not on the backs of the oppressed, but on the cooperation of equals. The humans had given them that chance. Whether they would take it remained to be seen. 6 months had passed since the fall. That's what the remaining Imperial citizens called it now. Not the revolution, not the exodus, simply the fall. On Zayrath Prime, the once gleaming capital of a galaxy-spanning empire had transformed into something unrecognizable. The crystal spires still stood, but half were dark. Their power systems failed without human maintenance. In what had once been the Empire's greatest technical university, Professor Zixtheta led her students through the ruins of a power generation facility. The Altair scientist's bioluminescent skin flickered with frustration as she examined the control panels. "Can anyone tell me what this component does?" she asked, pointing to a module that humans had installed decades ago. Silence. Her students, brilliant minds from a dozen species, could only stare at the technology they had taken for granted their entire lives. They understood the theory of power generation, but the practical application, the countless small innovations that kept systems running, that knowledge had left with the humans. "This," Zixtheta said quietly, "is why we're here. To learn what we should have learned centuries ago. To understand rather than simply use." Meanwhile, in the depths of space, the new Republic of Humanity was building something unprecedented. On Haven Prime, the first world fully controlled by free humans, cities rose that defied imagination. Not because they were grand or imposing, but because they were designed for living rather than domination. Marcus Webb, now retired from military service, worked in his garden beside his daughter Lily. The soil was real, the plants grew according to nature's timeline, and no one would ever demand he produce more than the earth could sustainably give. "Dad," Lily asked, her hands dirty from planting seeds, "do you think they'll come looking for us?" Marcus considered the question. His daughter was old enough now to understand the complexities of what had happened. "Some might try," he admitted, "but they'll find we're much harder to locate than they expect." This was humanity's final secret. The quantum technology they had developed hadn't just allowed them to leave, it had allowed them to hide. The human colonies existed in a state of controlled quantum flux, technically present in normal space, but impossible to locate without knowing the exact frequency of their existence. It was a level of technology that the Empire's greatest scientists were only beginning to theorize about. On the Imperial core world of Korvax, High Chancellor Threk convened another emergency meeting. The massive obsidian being had aged visibly in the past months, stress fractures covering his once smooth surface. Around him, representatives of 40 species argued about resource allocation. "The Threnodai colonies need medical supplies," one delegate insisted. "The Altair systems need food more urgently," another countered. "We all need power generation restored first," a third argued. Threk slammed a massive fist on the table, silencing them. "We need to stop thinking like the Empire," he rumbled. "The humans didn't just take their labor when they left. They took the lesson we refused to learn. We cannot command our way out of this crisis. We must cooperate. It was a radical concept for beings who had spent millennia in a rigid hierarchy. The empire had functioned on the principle that orders flow down and resources flowed up. Now, with that system shattered, they were learning what humans had always known, that sustainable civilization required mutual support, not extraction. In the abandoned human quarters of Station Zeta 9, salvage teams made a disturbing discovery. The humans hadn't stripped their homes of technology or resources. Instead, they had left everything in perfect order, with instruction manuals, maintenance schedules, and even training videos. But there was always a note, written in a dozen languages, knowledge freely given to those who seek to learn, not to own. Lieutenant Visha, a young Zarathi security officer, played one of the training videos. Sarah Chen's face appeared, recorded years before her death. She was teaching a class on quantum mechanics, but her words carried deeper meaning. The universe doesn't care about your species or your empire, Sarah said to her long-ago students. Physics works the same for everyone. The only difference between species isn't capability, it's opportunity. Today, I'm sharing opportunity. Visha found herself mesmerized. The human woman spoke about complex equations with the same passion others reserve for poetry. But more than that, she spoke as if her students were equals, regardless of species. It was a perspective the Empire had never embraced. Back on Haven Prime, the human government convened for its monthly council. There were no emperors here, no hereditary rulers. Instead, representatives chosen by their communities gathered to discuss and decide collectively. It was messy, inefficient by imperial standards, and absolutely revolutionary. President Maria Santos, the same woman who had coordinated the agricultural evacuation, addressed the assembly. We've received another communication from the Imperial Senate. They're requesting humanitarian aid. The room stirred. Many here had suffered under imperial rule. The scars, physical and psychological, ran deep. They enslaved us, one representative said flatly. Let them figure it out themselves. They're dying, another countered. Children are starving because their parents never learned to grow food. Is that justice? The debate continued for hours. Democracy in action was slow, but it ensured every voice was heard. Finally, a consensus emerged. Humanity would send aid, but not in the form the Empire expected. 3 days later, packages began appearing on struggling imperial worlds. Not food or medicine or technology, but something far more valuable: knowledge. Complete agricultural guides, medical databases, engineering manuals. Everything a civilization needed to rebuild, provided freely with only one condition. It must be shared equally among all species. On Threnodai Prime, Hive Queen ZTH received the human package with her council. The insectoid leader's compound eyes studied the data crystals suspiciously. It could be a trap, her security advisor buzzed. What kind of trap teaches your enemy to be self-sufficient? ZTH replied. She activated the first crystal and gasped. It contained not just agricultural data, but the complete history of human farming, from the first seeds planted in Earth soil to the advanced hydroponics of their space stations. Millennia of trial, error, and success given freely. They're teaching us to not need them, she realized. They're ensuring we can never enslave them again by making sure we don't need to. This was the fourth dimension of the human strategy, the one that even Marcus Webb hadn't fully grasped until after the Exodus. By sharing knowledge freely, they were creating a galaxy where no species could dominate through exclusive control of technology or resources. They were building a future where cooperation was beneficial, not mandatory. Back in the Empire's crumbling Senate, the debate over accepting human aid revealed the deep fractures in imperial society. Some senators, clinging to the old ways, insisted it was a humiliation to accept help from former slaves. Others, mostly from species that had also suffered under imperial hierarchy, argued for pragmatism. Senator Vyth Axe, the former agricultural minister, had become an unlikely voice for reform. His emerald form had dulled with stress, but His words carried new wisdom. We stand at crossroads, he addressed the Senate. We can cling to our pride and watch our people starve, or we can learn the lesson the humans paid so dearly to teach us. The empire fell because we believed in our own superiority. Perhaps what rises from its ashes can believe in something better, equality. The vote was close, but pragmatism won. The empire would accept human knowledge, and, with it, accept that humans had surpassed them not through conquest, but through cooperation. On Haven Prime, schools were being built that would have been impossible under imperial rule. Human children learned alongside those of other species who had chosen freedom over the dying empire. The curriculum included not just science and mathematics, but history, real history, not the propaganda of victors. Lily Webb sat in her classroom, working on a project about the fall. Her teacher, Mr. Okonkwo, had lived through it, spending 30 years as a maintenance worker on an imperial battlecruiser before the Exodus. "Why didn't we fight them?" one student asked. "We had all that secret technology. We could have won a war." Mr. Okonkwo smiled sadly. "Winning a war would have made us like them. We didn't want to replace the empire. We wanted to transcend it. Violence breeds violence. Oppression breeds oppression. We broke the cycle by refusing to participate. But people died," another student protested. "Miss Sarah and others." "Yes," the teacher acknowledged. "And we honor them by building something worthy of their sacrifice. They died so you could live free. Make sure that freedom means something." In the depths of space, hidden observation posts monitored the dying empire. Humans watched not with gloating satisfaction, but with genuine concern. They had achieved their freedom, but they took no joy in the suffering of others. Dr. Elizabeth Chong, who had stayed behind to treat the atmospheric plague on Kelver 3, had become a legend on that world. She had missed the Exodus, choosing to save Threnodai lives over her own freedom. Now, months later, she worked in a hospital that bore her name, teaching Threnodai medics human techniques. "You stayed," Hive Princess Zekvara said during one of her visits, "even knowing you would be trapped here." "Why?" "Because healing doesn't recognize species," Elizabeth replied, checking on a patient. "And because I wanted to prove that humans weren't leaving out of hatred. We were leaving for freedom. There's a difference." "What difference?" "Hatred would have left you to die. Freedom just means we choose our own path. I chose to heal." The princess considered this. The empire would never have understood such a choice. "No," Elizabeth agreed. "That's why it fell." Reports were coming in from across the former empire. Some worlds descended into chaos, unable to adapt to self-governance. Others, particularly those with diverse populations, were forming new alliances based on mutual need rather than imposed hierarchy. The Galactic Empire was dead, but from its corpse, 100 smaller civilizations were being born. On Zerath Prime, the former emperor lived in what had once been a servant's quarters. His crystalline form had lost its sharp edges, weathered by loss and humiliation into something almost humble. He spent his days studying the human manuals, trying to understand the technology that had once served him. "Your Magnificence," his last loyal servant addressed him, though the title was meaningless now. "Don't call me that," he replied. "I'm not magnificent. I'm barely functional. Look," he gestured at the simple heating unit he was trying to repair. "I ruled 10,000 systems, and I can't even fix basic climate control." The humans made it look easy, because to them it was easy. They understood it. "We just used it." He manipulated the controls again, following the manual's instructions. Suddenly, warm air flowed. His first successful repair. "There, I did something useful. For the first time in 5 centuries, I actually did something useful." It was a small victory, but across the former empire, such small victories were adding up. Species that had never spoken as equals were learning to communicate. Beings who had only known how to command were learning to request. Civilizations built on exploitation were learning cooperation. The Human Observer Post noted these changes carefully. The plan had always extended beyond simple freedom. They had wanted to transform the galaxy, to create conditions where no empire could rise to enslave others again. By removing themselves and sharing knowledge, they had forced every species to face the same choice: evolve or die. On Haven Prime, the memorial to the fallen was completed. 47 meters tall, one for each minute between Sarah Chen's death and the Empire's fall. At its base, 18 names were carved in stone: Sarah and the 17 who died during the evacuation. But the memorial wasn't just for the dead. "We gather here," President Santos said at the dedication, "not to mourn but to remember. Remember that freedom required sacrifice. Remember that knowledge must be shared. Remember that no being should kneel to another. And remember that sometimes the greatest victory is simply walking away." The crowd, human and non-human alike, stood in respectful silence. Among them were refugees from the Empire, beings who had chosen freedom over the familiar. They were building new lives, contributing their own knowledge and perspectives to humanity's grand experiment. In the highest levels of human government, a debate raged about the next phase. Some argued for complete isolation, letting the former empire solve its own problems. Others pushed for more active intervention, sharing not just knowledge but resources. "We're not gods," Marcus Webb argued in council. "We can't and shouldn't try to control their development. But we can't just watch children starve," Dr. Chan countered via quantum communication from Kelver 3. "We have a means to help." "Help, yes. Control, no," President Santos mediated. "We share knowledge. We provide emergency aid when requested. But we don't create dependence. That's how the Empire started. Species depending on others instead of developing themselves. The compromise reached was typically human, messy but practical. Aid would continue, but always in the form of education rather than resources. Teach a species to fish, don't just give them fish. It was slower, harder, but ultimately more sustainable. 6 months after the fall, patterns were emerging. The core worlds of the Empire, most dependent on complex systems, struggled most. But the frontier worlds, where species had maintained more of their traditional knowledge, adapted quickly. Some formed new federations based on mutual support. Others chose isolation, returning to pre-spaceflight existence. On a small agricultural world called Verdant, something remarkable happened. Threnodai farmers, Altair scientists, and Korvax engineers came together to solve a crop failure. Using human knowledge as a foundation, but adding their own species' insights, they created a new strain of grain that could feed all 3 species. It was the first truly collaborative innovation of the post-Empire era. When news of this reached Haven Prime, celebrations broke out spontaneously. This was what they had hoped for, not just the Empire's end, but the beginning of something better. Species working together by choice, innovating through cooperation, building a future where diversity was strength rather than hierarchy. But challenges remained. Pirates, taking advantage of the chaos, raided vulnerable worlds. Former Imperial military units, refusing to accept the new reality, attempted to carve out their own kingdoms. And, on some worlds, new oppressors rose to fill the vacuum left by the Empire. Humanity watched, recorded, and occasionally intervened. When a Zarathi warlord attempted to enslave a colony of peaceful Altair, he found his weapons mysteriously offline and his ships unable to navigate. A message appeared on every screen. The Age of Empires is over. Choose a better path. The warlord, faced with superior technology and the implicit threat behind the message, withdrew. But humanity didn't gloat or conquer. They simply ensured that those who would build new empires found it impossible to do so. The quantum technology that had freed humanity became a shield for all species seeking self-determination. On Earth itself, kept secret from all but the highest levels of human government, ancient cities were being rebuilt. Humanity had never forgotten its birth world. And now, free from the threat of imperial discovery, they were returning home. The blue marble that had birthed their species would be restored, a reminder of where they came from and why they had fought so hard for freedom. "Look," Lily Webb said to her class, showing them images from Earth. This is where we started. One world divided by nations and conflicts. It took us centuries to unite, and even then, we nearly destroyed ourselves. But we learned, and when the Empire came, we were ready. Ready to fight? A young student asked. Ready to survive? Lily corrected. Fighting is easy. Surviving with your principles intact is hard. We could have become like the Empire to defeat them. Instead, we became something they couldn't understand or counter. United, patient, and free. The lesson resonated beyond the classroom. Across human space, the story of Earth's transformation from a divided world to a united species gave hope to the former imperial worlds struggling with their own divisions. If humanity could overcome its differences, perhaps they could too. 6 months after an empire fell in 47 minutes, the galaxy was transforming. Not through conquest or collapse, but through the slow, difficult work of learning to stand without leaning on others' backs. The humans had given them the tools and the opportunity. What each species did with that chance would determine the shape of the galaxy for millennia to come. In the quantum flux of hidden space, 10 billion humans built their future, watching and waiting. They had won their freedom not through military might, but through patience, planning, and the simple recognition that true power came not from controlling others, but from controlling yourself. The Empire had fallen because it forgot that fundamental truth. Humanity thrived because they never had. 5 years had passed since the fall, and the galaxy barely resembled its former self. Where once the Empire's uniformity had imposed order, now 1,000 different experiments in civilization bloomed. On the frontier world of new harmony, representatives from 12 species gathered for what they were calling the First Galactic Symposium. Not a government, but a forum for sharing knowledge and resolving conflicts. Ambassador Kvera of the Threnodidae stepped up to the speaking platform, her chitinous wings catching the light. 5 years ago, my people were dying of atmospheric plague. Today, we've not only survived, but developed treatments for 16 other species-specific diseases. This happened because humans taught us that knowledge shared multiplies, while knowledge hoarded diminishes. In the audience, former Admiral Kryn watched with interest. His crystalline form had changed, the deep purple of military authority replaced by the clear transparency that Zarathi adopted when pursuing knowledge. He had spent these 5 years studying human history, trying to understand how a species that had barely achieved spaceflight could bring down an empire that had lasted millennia. The answer, he had learned, lay not in their technology, but in their history. Humans had experienced empire from both sides, as conquerors and conquered. They had learned its weaknesses through bitter experience. The British Empire, the Roman Empire, the Mongol Empire, all had fallen for the same reason the Galactic Empire had. They had grown beyond their ability to maintain control without the very people they oppressed. The next speaker, Kvera announced, represents a remarkable transformation. Please welcome Director Zix Theta of the Restored Technology Initiative. The Altair scientist took the platform, her bioluminescent skin pulsing with nervous energy. Behind her, holographic displays showed images of rebuilt power plants, functioning hospitals, and thriving agricultural centers. When the humans left, she began, we thought we were doomed. Our entire civilization depended on technology we didn't understand. But in their wisdom, they left us more than manuals. They left us a challenge, learn or perish. Today, I'm proud to announce that 17 worlds have achieved complete technological self-sufficiency. Applause rippled through the assembly, but Zix Theta raised a hand for silence. However, we must acknowledge the darker side of our progress. 9 worlds have fallen into pre-space flight barbarism. 12 are controlled by warlords. And the vegan sector, she paused, pain evident even in her alien features. The vegan sector burns with civil war. Freedom, we have learned, is harder than slavery. On Haven Prime, President Santos watched the symposium through quantum relays. Around her, the Human Council debated their response to the vegan crisis. Three species fighting over resources that had once been distributed by imperial decree, resulting in millions of deaths. We should intervene, Counselor Martinez argued. We have the power to stop this. With what right? Counselor Okafor countered. We're not the galaxy's police. We fought for the right to determine our own fate. They have the same right, even if they use it poorly. Children are dying, Dr. Chong interjected from her permanent posting on Kelver 3. At what point does non-interference become complicity? It was the eternal human dilemma, when to act and when to refrain. They had the power to impose peace on the vegan sector, but doing so would make them no better than the empire they had toppled. Yet standing by, while innocence suffered, challenged every human instinct. There is a middle path, Marcus Webb suggested. He had been elected to the council despite his reluctance, his experience during the fall making him a voice people trusted. We don't intervene militarily, but we offer sanctuary. Any being who reaches our borders seeking escape from violence receives it. We don't impose peace, but we provide an alternative to war. The vote was close, but the measure passed. Within days, human ships appeared at the edges of the vegan sector, not to fight, but to rescue. They broadcasted a simple message: safe passage to all who choose peace over war. The response was overwhelming. Millions of beings, exhausted by conflict, fled to human transports. Families torn apart by artificial imperial boundaries reunited. Children who had known only war saw their first peaceful sunrise. But millions more remained, committed to their conflicts, determined to claim what they believed was theirs. Back at the symposium, a new speaker took the stage, one who caused a stir of surprise and some hostility. Former Emperor Exwenendel of the Zarathi, his crystalline form now a humble gray, approached the podium slowly. I have no right to speak to you, he began, his voice lacking the commanding resonance it once held. For centuries, I embodied the system that oppressed you. But perhaps my words have value precisely because of my failures. I have learned what you always knew, that power without wisdom is destruction waiting to happen. The audience listened in tense silence as he continued. The empire fell in 47 minutes, but its true collapse began the day we stopped seeing other species as equals. We convinced ourselves that complexity required hierarchy, that order demanded obedience. The humans proved us wrong not by destroying us, but by removing themselves from our equation. In doing so, they revealed the truth: we were never strong. We were parasites feeding on their strength. Some in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Many had been part of the imperial system, benefiting from it even as it oppressed others. The former emperor's words forced them to confront their own complicity. But I come not to seek forgiveness that must be earned through actions, not words. I come to share what I've learned. The humans left us tools and knowledge, but the most important thing they left was a question. What will you build when no one forces you to build? Some worlds have found inspiring answers. Others, he gestured sadly, others have found only new ways to oppress. The choice remains ours. On a remote world at the galaxy's edge, a different kind of meeting was taking place. Commander Wei Chun, Sarah Chin's younger brother, met with representatives of what they were calling the Shadow Fleet. Not all humans had left Imperial space during the Exodus. Some had stayed behind, hidden, watching, ready to act if the old patterns of oppression reemerged. The Corvin Syndicate is establishing slave operations in the Outer Rim, one operative reported. They're targeting species too weak to resist. Wei's face hardened. His sister had died to free humanity, but her vision had been broader, a galaxy free from slavery entirely. Options. Their operation depends on modified Imperial technology. We could disable it remotely, but that would reveal our presence. Do it, Wei ordered without hesitation. Let them wonder. Let them fear. Let everyone know that slavery has consequences, even if they can't see who enforces them. Across the Outer Rim, slave ships found their engines failing, their navigation systems directing them to freedom instead of markets. Slaves walked free while their would-be masters raged at technology that no longer obeyed them. And always the same message appeared. The age of chains is over. Adapt or face irrelevance. The Shadow Fleet became a legend, a whisper in dark places that made would-be oppressors think twice. Some claimed they were ghosts of humans killed by the Empire. Others believed they were automated systems left behind. The truth, that thousands of humans had chosen to remain hidden in Imperial space to protect the vulnerable, was known only to a few. On New Harmony, the symposium continued with practical workshops. Former Imperial engineers learned human techniques from recorded lessons. Agricultural specialists from different species shared innovations. Medical practitioners exchanged treatments that had once been guarded secrets. It was messy, sometimes contentious, but it was progress. Young beings who had been children during the fall were coming of age in this new galaxy. They had no memory of the Empire's rigid hierarchies, no ingrained acceptance of superiority and inferiority. To them, cooperation between species was natural, even obvious. They were the first generation of the truly free, and their perspectives often shocked their elders. Why did the Empire separate species by districts? A young Korvax asked during a history lesson. To maintain control, her teacher, a veteran of the Imperial bureaucracy, explained. If species didn't interact, they couldn't unite against the Empire. But that's stupid, the student protested. My best friend is Threnodai. We solve problems better together because we think differently. The teacher had no response. The child had grasped intuitively what the Empire had spent millennia denying. That diversity was strength, not weakness. These children, raised in freedom, were building a future their parents could barely imagine. In human space, the debate over intervention intensified. Reports from a Shadow Fleet painted a grim picture of some regions. New empires were trying to form, some even more brutal than the old. The technology humans had shared was being weaponized. The freedom they had granted was being used to oppress. We gave them the tools to build paradise, one counselor lamented. Some are building new hells instead. Freedom includes the freedom to fail, President Santos replied sadly. We can't force them to be better. We can only show them it's possible. But for how long do we watch suffering we could prevent? The question hung in the air, unanswered because there was no good answer. On the 5th anniversary of the fall, humanity made a decision that shocked the galaxy. They partially revealed themselves, establishing embassy stations at key points throughout former Imperial space. Not colonies or military bases, but simple platforms where any species could come to learn, trade, or seek mediation. The first to arrive at Embassy Station Alpha was a delegation from the vegan sector, exhausted by years of war. We've tried everything, their representative, a battle-scarred Altair, admitted. Traditional negotiations, military solutions, separation. Nothing works. Our hatred runs too deep. But you found a way to unite a divided species. Teach us. Ambassador Maria Rodriguez, great-granddaughter of refugees from Earth's ancient conflicts, welcomed them warmly. We can't teach you to stop hating, she said honestly. Hatred is a choice each being makes. But we can teach you to build systems that function despite hatred, to create structures that incentivize cooperation over conflict, to make peace more profitable than war. It was a humble offer, not salvation but tools, not solutions but possibilities. Some delegations left disappointed, wanting magic answers to complex problems. But others stayed, learned, and returned to their worlds with new ideas. The embassy stations became neutral ground, places where enemies could meet without fear. Human mediators, trained in techniques developed over centuries of their own conflicts, helped species find common ground. Not all succeeded, but enough did that hope spread. On Haven Prime, Lily Webb, now a young woman, prepared for her first assignment as a cultural liaison. She would be stationed at Embassy Station Gamma, helping species understand not just human technology, but human thinking. Are you nervous? Her father asked. Terrified, she admitted. What if I fail? What if the conflicts are too deep? What if they see humans as just another species trying to control them? Marcus hugged his daughter. Then you'll learn, adjust, and try again. That's what humans do. We're not perfect. We just refuse to give up. Is that why we won? Stubbornness? Partly, Marcus smiled, but mostly because we remembered something the Empire forgot, that every being, regardless of species, wants the same basic things. Safety, purpose, the chance to see their children do better. We built our revolution on that truth. Now you'll help others find their own truths. As Lily departed for her assignment, she carried with her more than training and technology. She carried the legacy of Sarah Chun, who had died believing that ideas were stronger than empires. She carried the wisdom of 10 billion humans who had chosen freedom over security. She carried the hope that the galaxy could be better than it had been. The 5th year after the fall ended not with celebration, but with reflection. The galaxy was free, but fractured. Some regions prospered while others burned. Some species soared while others struggled. It was messy, chaotic, sometimes tragic, but it was real. No longer was suffering hidden behind imperial efficiency. No longer was oppression disguised as order. In the ruins of the Imperial Palace on Zarath Prime, now converted into a museum and learning center, visitors could see the throne room where the Empire had ended. A plaque, written in 100 languages, marked the spot where the last emperor had received news of humanity's exodus. Here fell an empire that mistook control for strength, uniformity for unity, fear for respect. May all who build on these ruins remember, true civilization is not measured by the height of your towers or the reach of your power, but by how you treat those you could oppress but choose not to. The humans taught us this lesson in 47 minutes. May we spend the next 10,000 years proving we learned it. Below the plaque, someone had added graffiti in small letters. The authorities had chosen to leave it. Sarah Chun was here in all our hearts. The galaxy had 5 years of freedom behind it, and an uncertain eternity ahead. But for the first time in 10 millennia, every being had the chance to choose their own path. That chance, paid for in courage and sacrifice, was humanity's greatest gift to the stars. Whether the galaxy would squander it or treasure it remained to be seen. But in hidden space, 10 billion humans watched and hoped, ready to teach, but not to control, to guide, but not to govern. They had broken the wheel of empire. Now others would decide what to build in its place. 10 years had passed since the fall, and the galaxy stood at a crossroads. In the great assembly hall of New Unity Station, built where the Empire's mightiest battle station once orbited, representatives from over 300 independent worlds gathered. This was no empire, no federation, not even a republic. It was something entirely new, the Galactic Cooperation, where each world retained complete sovereignty but chose to work together. Lily Webb, now Director of Human Galactic Relations, watched from the observation deck as species that had once knelt before emperors now stood as equals. Her teacher, Sarah Chun, would have been proud to see this moment. Not perfect harmony, but honest cooperation born from necessity and nurtured by hope. The vegan sector war has finally ended, reported Ambassador Kfera, her Threnodai wings now bearing scars from her peacekeeping efforts. Not through victory of any side, but through exhaustion and the patient work of mediators. 3 species who swore eternal hatred now share governance of their system. It is fragile, but it exists. Around the assembly, similar stories emerged. The Korvax Mining Confederation had transformed from brutal extraction to sustainable development. The Altair Knowledge Network freely shared scientific advances that would have been hoarded under the Empire. Even the Zarathi, once the Empire's iron fist, had embraced radical transparency in their governance. But the most remarkable transformation had occurred in humanity itself. No longer hidden, they had established 7 embassy worlds throughout the galaxy. Not colonies to exploit, but centers of learning and refuge. Each world showcased a different aspect of human achievement. Agricultural innovation, medical advancement, artistic expression, technological development, conflict resolution, historical preservation, and ecological restoration. President Wei Chun, Sarah's brother who had led the Shadow Fleet for 5 years before emerging into public service, addressed the assembly. His hair was gray now, his face lined with the weight of decisions made in darkness and light. 10 years ago, my sister died believing that ideas could not be killed. Today we see her idea made manifest, not a galaxy ruled by force, but one guided by choice. He paused, looking at faces both human and alien. But we must acknowledge our failures alongside our successes. 17 worlds have fallen to chaos. Millions have died in conflicts we might have prevented. Some nights, I wonder if we should have done more, intervened sooner, imposed our vision of freedom. But then, I remember Sarah's words. True freedom is messy. It includes the freedom to fail, to learn, to grow at your own pace. We gave the galaxy that freedom. Some have soared, others have stumbled, but all have chosen their own paths. That is the difference between liberation and another form of control. In the margins of civilized space, the Shadow Fleet still operated, now officially acknowledged as the protective service. They didn't conquer or control, but simply ensured that those who would rebuild empires found it impossibly difficult. Slave ships malfunctioned. Weapons meant for oppression failed. Would-be tyrants discovered their grand plans undone by mysterious technical failures. Commander Torres, who had once served as Marcus Webb's communication officer, now led these operations. Her teams included members of dozens of species, all united in preventing the return of systematic oppression. They were ghosts in the machine of galactic civilization, ensuring that freedom's price continued to be paid. On the agricultural world of New Haven, a remarkable experiment was underway. Humans, Threnodai, Altair, Korvax, and even Zarathi lived together in integrated communities. Children grew up playing together, their different biologies and psychologies creating innovative solutions to shared problems. It was here that the next phase of galactic evolution was being born, not in grand assemblies, but in playgrounds and classrooms. "Look," a young Zarathi child exclaimed to her human friend. "If I adjust my crystal frequency to match your neural patterns, we can share thoughts directly." Her teacher, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, watched in amazement. The children were discovering abilities that their species had never developed in isolation. Separation had been the Empire's tool of control, but integration was becoming the foundation of something unprecedented, true interspecies evolution. But the galaxy's transformation wasn't without its opponents. In the Deep Rim, a coalition of former Imperial military officers had established the New Order, attempting to recreate the Empire's structure on a smaller scale. They had studied humanity's revolution, learning from the Empire's mistakes. They allowed more autonomy, shared more technology, but still maintained strict hierarchy and control. "They're smarter than the old Empire," Wei Chen admitted during a security briefing. "They've learned to make oppression comfortable, even desirable for some. They offer security in exchange for freedom, and after 10 years of chaos, some worlds are accepting." "So we stop them," suggested a council member. "How?" Wei asked. "By imposing our will? By deciding for other species what freedom should look like? That would make us the very thing we fought against." It was humanity's eternal struggle, the balance between protecting freedom and becoming freedom's dictator. They had the power to crush the New Order, but using it would betray everything they stood for. Instead, they chose a different path. "We compete," President Chen announced. "We show the galaxy that cooperation works better than control. We make our embassy worlds so successful, so prosperous, so free that species choose our model over theirs. We win by example, not force." The competition between ideologies played out across the galaxy. Some worlds chose the New Order security. Others embraced the chaotic freedom of independence. Most found middle ground, taking lessons from both while forging their own paths. The galaxy became a vast experiment in governance, with hundreds of different systems competing and evolving. On Earth, kept secret until now, humanity prepared for its greatest revelation. The homeworld had been restored, its scars healed, its divisions mended. Cities that balanced technology with nature, governments that served rather than ruled, societies that celebrated diversity as strength. Earth had become what humanity hoped the galaxy could be. It's time, the Global Council decided unanimously. Time to show them where we came from, what we overcame, what's possible. The announcement sent shockwaves through the galaxy. Earth, the legendary human homeworld, would open its doors to visitors, not as conquerors or subjects, but as guests and students. Every species was invited to send representatives to learn not just human technology, but human history, the wars, the failures, the long climb from tribalism to unity. The first alien visitor to Earth was, by careful design, former Emperor Exwendel. His crystalline form, now permanently shifted to the clear state of a seeker, stood where humans had once launched their first spacecraft. Tears, or the Zarathi equivalent, formed as he understood the journey humanity had taken. You went from this, he gestured at the primitive rocket display, to bringing down the Galactic Empire in less than 300 years. His guide, an elderly woman named Chun Lu, one of Sarah Chin's many cousins, smiled. We went from killing each other over skin color and beliefs to standing united against the galaxy's greatest empire. Every species has that potential. You just have to survive your own worst impulses long enough to realize it. The tours of Earth became legendary. Visitors saw the ruins of ancient wars preserved as warnings. They walked through museums dedicated to humanity's failures, slavery, genocide, environmental destruction. But they also saw the recovery, the learning, the slow building of something better. You show your failures? A young Altair asked, confused. The Empire only displayed its victories. Failures teach more than victories, Chun Lu explained. Every mistake we made, every horror we inflicted on ourselves, taught us what not to do. The Empire fell because it